No one saw it coming. A packed ballroom, flashing cameras, the political elite whispering behind their champagne glasses. And at the center of it all, Barron Trump, standing tall, unshaken, as Hunter Biden stepped up to the microphone. The moment Hunter's voice rang through the speakers, the mood shifted. This wasn't just a speech. It was an attack, one designed to humiliate the youngest Trump in front of the world. "I wonder if young Barron here knows what real charitable work looks like," Hunter sneered, his words cutting through the elegant atmosphere. "Or has his silver spoon upbringing only taught him about tax write-offs and foundation scandals?" A murmur spread through the crowd. Some laughed. Others pulled out their phones ready to record the drama. But what happened next left everyone speechless, because Barron didn't react the way they expected. He didn't flinch. He didn't fire back. He simply smiled. And in that moment, he did something no one, especially not Hunter, was prepared for. By the time he finished speaking, the room wasn't laughing anymore. They were listening. And what he revealed didn't just silence his critics, it changed everything. The Metropolitan Charity Gala was supposed to be an evening of elegance and philanthropy, a room filled with the nation's wealthiest, most influential figures, all gathered under a glittering chandelier, sipping champagne, and exchanging pleasantries. But beneath the polished smiles and expensive suits, tension lingered in the air. Everyone knew what was about to happen. Barron Trump had always been a mystery, rarely making public appearances, rarely speaking in front of an audience. Unlike his father and older siblings, he had mostly stayed out of the political spotlight, but tonight that was about to change. Hunter Biden, standing at the podium, had the attention of every single person in the room. He smirked, gripping the microphone, knowing he had the advantage. This wasn't just a speech. This was a carefully planned moment, an opportunity to embarrass the son of his father's biggest political rival. And Barron? He was alone. No advisors whispering in his ear. No teleprompters feeding him a response. Just an 18-year-old standing in the middle of a battlefield, surrounded by people waiting to see if he would sink or swim. The crowd hushed as Hunter leaned in, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "It's always inspiring to see the next generation take an interest in philanthropy. But tell me, Barron, do you even know what that word means?" Laughter rippled through the audience. A few guests exchanged amused glances, expecting Barron to stammer, to fumble, to crumble under pressure. But as they turned their eyes to him, expecting a flustered response, they saw something else entirely. A quiet, unwavering confidence. Barron Trump wasn't panicking, he wasn't even blinking. Instead, he took a slow step forward, his expression calm, almost amused. And at that moment, everyone realized this wasn't going to go the way Hunter had planned. The room held its breath. All eyes were on Barron Trump, waiting for the inevitable. A flustered reaction, an angry rebuttal, maybe even an awkward retreat. But instead, Barron did something no one expected. He smiled. Not a smug, defensive smirk. Not an arrogant grin. Just a quiet, knowing smile that made Hunter Biden hesitate for the first time that evening. The laughter in the room died down. The cameras zoomed in. Even the political elites, so used to watching public figures crumble under pressure, leaned forward in their seats. Barron took a step toward the microphone, his movements unhurried, controlled. Then, in a voice that was steady, measured, and completely unfazed, he spoke. "Thank you, Hunter, for bringing attention to such an important topic." The audience froze. That was not the response they had expected. "You're right," Barron continued, his gaze unwavering. "I have been privileged. And that's exactly why my father taught me that privilege comes with responsibility." A murmur rippled through the crowd. This wasn't a defense. It wasn't an attack. It was something else entirely. Something calculated, yet undeniably sincere. Barron let his words sink in before continuing, his tone shifting from calm to razor sharp. "While some people talk about making a difference, others simply do the work." That's when he dropped the bombshell. "You mentioned charitable work, Hunter. Funny thing, just last month our foundation helped fund the Veterans Support Program you praised earlier tonight." Gasps echoed through the ballroom. Hunter's smirk faltered. Barron had just flipped the entire situation on its head. Hunter had mocked him for his supposed lack of involvement in philanthropy. But now Barron was standing there, calmly revealing that he had been working behind the scenes, without cameras, without headlines, without seeking recognition. And worse, he had done it in a way that left Hunter with nowhere to go. The weight of Barron's words settled over the audience, the laughter was gone, the whispers had stopped. Even the reporters in the room, who had come expecting an easy scandal, found themselves scrambling to rethink their headlines. This wasn't just an 18-year-old holding his own against a seasoned political figure. This was something far more dangerous. Barron Trump wasn't just surviving the attack. He was controlling the narrative. And Hunter Biden was starting to realize he had just walked straight into a trap. The ballroom was silent now. The tension in the air was almost palpable as Barron Trump stood at the podium, completely in control. But he wasn't finished. "You see, Mr. Biden," Barron said, his tone calm but commanding, "the veteran support program you so generously praised earlier tonight, that initiative wasn't just something I supported. It was launched through our foundation last month." The audience gasped audibly, their disbelief mirrored in Hunter Biden's expression. This wasn't a rebuttal, it was a strategic move that completely dismantled Hunter's attempt at humiliation. Barron paused for a moment, allowing the weight of his words to sink in. Then, with the precision of someone far beyond his years, he turned to address the entire room. "It's easy to criticize from the sidelines," he continued, "but real leadership is about rolling up your sleeves and getting the work done. And sometimes that work isn't glamorous. It's not about headlines or recognition. It's about results." He then took it one step further. "In fact," Barron added, pulling out his phone, "let me show you something." With a quick gesture, the massive screens behind him lit up, displaying real-time data from the very program Hunter had mentioned. Charts and statistics filled the screens, showcasing how the initiative had already provided support to hundreds of families in need. The audience was captivated. The impact was undeniable. Barron turned back to Hunter, his expression still composed. "So while you were preparing your speech to criticize me," he said, "I was meeting with families affected by the opioid crisis and finding ways to make a real difference. Because that's what I was taught, that our names don't define us, our actions do." The room erupted into whispers, but this time they weren't mocking or skeptical. They were in awe. Barron's quiet confidence and undeniable evidence had turned the narrative upside down. Hunter Biden, for the first time that evening, looked genuinely shaken. His smirk was gone, replaced by an expression of unease. He hadn't just lost the upper hand, he had lost control of the entire moment. And Barron? He wasn't done yet. With the crowd now hanging on his every word, Barron leaned into the microphone one last time. "But this isn't about me, or even about you, Mr. Biden," he said. "This is about showing what's possible when we focus on solutions instead of divisions." The ballroom erupted into applause. Some stood, clapping in genuine admiration for the young Trump's composure and poise. Others hurried to capture the moment on their phones, knowing they were witnessing something extraordinary. Barron Trump had done more than reveal the truth. He had completely redefined the narrative, proving that grace and action could dismantle even the sharpest criticism. And for Hunter Biden, the realization was clear. This wasn't just a public exchange. It was a lesson in leadership. The room was still buzzing, but Barron wasn't done yet. He had just flipped the script on Hunter Biden, exposing the irony of his attack with undeniable facts. But instead of gloating or pressing his advantage, Barron did something no one expected. He extended an olive branch. "I get it," Barron said, his voice steady. "People like us, born into powerful families, are constantly judged. Some think we don't understand real struggle, that we don't care. But the truth is, privilege doesn't shield anyone from pain. It just means we have a greater responsibility to help others." The audience, still reeling from the power shift, now found themselves listening more closely. Barron wasn't just defending himself, he was reframing the entire conversation. Then he took it further. "Mr. Biden," he said, turning to face Hunter directly, "you spoke earlier about the opioid crisis and its devastating impact on American families. And you're right, it's one of the biggest challenges we face." A murmur spread through the room. Everyone knew about Hunter's personal history with addiction, but Barron wasn't using it as a weapon. He wasn't mocking him. Instead, he was offering something completely unexpected, understanding. "In fact," Barron continued, "I sat with a 16-year-old last week. He told me he was afraid he'd end up just like his father, a man who lost everything to addiction. That hit home for me because I know what it's like to have people assume they know your future just because of your last name. The audience was silent. Some were visibly moved. Even Hunter Biden shifted in his seat, no longer the aggressor, but a man caught off guard by an unexpected show of compassion. Then Barron made his biggest move yet. "That's why I'm committing $50 million of my own inheritance to establish treatment centers in underserved communities," he announced. Gasps. Audible shock. Even the most jaded political figures in the room were stunned. But Barron wasn't done. He turned back to Hunter and with complete sincerity made him an offer. "And Mr. Biden, I'd like to invite you to join me in this initiative. Because while we may come from different families, different backgrounds, we both understand how addiction destroys lives. And instead of tearing each other down, maybe it's time we work together to build something better." For the first time that evening, Hunter Biden had no words. The crowd was no longer watching a confrontation. They were watching a moment of possibility, of unity. Some guests reached for their phones, texting colleagues and donors. Others simply sat in stunned silence, realizing that an 18-year-old had just demonstrated leadership far beyond his years. Even the cameras, once focused on capturing scandal, were now capturing something much rarer, a genuine attempt at change. And just like that, Barron Trump had turned an attack into an opportunity. The ballroom was silent, the kind of silence that only happens when something truly unexpected unfolds. Hunter Biden sat motionless, processing what had just happened. In less than 5 minutes, Barron Trump had dismantled his entire attack, not with insults, not with anger, but with grace, intelligence, and an invitation no one saw coming. Then, Barron did something that sealed the moment forever. He stepped down from the podium and walked directly toward Hunter's table. The room held its breath. Was this another power move? Was he about to shake hands, walk away, say something off mic? Hunter hesitated, caught between two choices: continue the fight or accept the challenge. For a long, tense moment, it wasn't clear which way this was going to go. Then, with the cameras rolling and the entire room watching, Hunter did something no one expected. He stood up, and he shook Barron's hand. The flashes from the cameras were almost blinding. The entire moment, captured from every angle, was instantly uploaded to social media. Within minutes, it was trending worldwide. Hashtag Barron Trump, hashtag NextGen Leadership, hashtag #ARealLeader. The headlines weren't about political rivalry anymore. They were about how an 18-year-old had just outmaneuvered one of the most seasoned political figures in the room, without throwing a single insult. Major news networks scrambled to cover the story. Analysts dissected Barron's speech. Social media flooded with reactions. Some called it a masterclass in handling criticism. Others dubbed it the moment that changed everything. Even Barron's harshest critics had to admit he had done something most politicians failed to do. He had led with action, not words. By the time the event ended, reporters weren't chasing Barron for sound bites. They were chasing Hunter. Was this planned? Do you regret trying to challenge Barron? Will you be joining his initiative? For once, Hunter Biden didn't have a quick response, because the truth was, Barron Trump had just done something bigger than winning an argument. He had shifted the entire conversation, and the impact of that night was only just beginning. By the next morning, the story had spread like wildfire, but the headlines weren't about Hunter Biden's attempted humiliation or the political drama of the Gala. Instead, they focused on Barron Trump's poise, his leadership, and his bold call to action. Major networks ran clips of Barron's speech on repeat, with commentators praising his ability to turn a public confrontation into an opportunity for collaboration. Social media was flooded with praise not just for Barron's composure, but for the message he delivered. "This is what the next generation of leadership should look like," one prominent journalist tweeted. Even more surprising was the reaction from Hunter Biden himself. Just 3 days after the Gala, he made a surprise appearance at one of Barron's charity events. Standing beside the young Trump, Hunter spoke candidly about his own struggles and publicly acknowledged the wisdom in Barron's approach. "Sometimes," Hunter said, his voice heavy with emotion, "it takes the clarity of youth to show us a better path forward." Together, they announced the formation of the Trump-Biden Youth Initiative, a groundbreaking program focused on addiction prevention and treatment for young Americans. The collaboration shocked political analysts. but it resonated deeply with the public. Donations poured in from across the political spectrum, proving that some causes truly transcend partisanship. Behind the scenes, even Barron's family was taken aback by his performance. Donald Trump himself called his son early the next morning. His voice, usually filled with bravado, carried a tone of unmistakable pride. "You did exactly what I taught you, son," he said. "You turned an attack into an opportunity, but you did it your way, with class." But perhaps the most powerful shift came from the public. Barron was no longer seen as just Trump's youngest son. He had carved out a new identity, one defined by his ability to lead with integrity and focus on solutions rather than divisions. Philanthropic organizations began adopting his approach, incorporating technology-driven transparency into their donation systems. Young people from prominent families were inspired by his example, stepping forward to use their privilege responsibly. Even political commentators known for their cynicism began to reference the Barron Trump approach as a model for handling public conflict with grace while achieving meaningful results. In boardrooms and dinner tables across the country, people were no longer talking about the feud between Hunter and Barron. They were talking about how a single night at a gala had redefined what leadership could look like. Barron Trump had done more than silence his critics. He had shown the world that even in a climate of division and hostility, there was room for collaboration, for compassion, and for progress. And as the initiative expanded to 20 states, with plans for international outreach, one thing became clear. The 18-year-old who had stood calm in the face of public humiliation wasn't just a Trump anymore. He was a symbol of a new kind of leadership, one built on action, humility, and the ability to turn controversy into meaningful change. Barron Trump didn't just win a debate that night. He changed the game entirely. In a world where political attacks dominate headlines, where leaders seem more focused on scoring points than solving problems, Barron took a different approach. He didn't meet insult with insult. He didn't react with emotion. Instead, he did something far more powerful. He led with action, not words. And the world took notice. Within hours of the event, social media exploded. Clips of Barron's speech flooded the internet, with millions debating whether they had just witnessed the birth of a new kind of leader. Even those who had previously dismissed him as nothing more than Donald Trump's youngest son were forced to admit this was something different. Major media outlets ran with the story, analyzing every moment. Pundits, strategists, and even former political rivals marveled at Barron's ability to turn an attack into an opportunity with a level of maturity and strategy that seemed far beyond his years. But the true impact wasn't just in the headlines. For years, Barron had been somewhat of an enigma, rarely making public appearances, staying out of the political limelight. That night changed everything. He wasn't just a Trump anymore. He had carved out his own identity, one that wasn't based on controversy, but on leadership. His ability to take control of a situation without resorting to anger or arrogance had left people stunned. Even those who had no interest in politics found themselves drawn to the story, not because of the rivalry, but because of the way Barron had handled it. What came next only solidified his reputation. The Trump-Biden Youth Initiative, initially dismissed as a symbolic gesture, quickly gained traction. Donations poured in from both sides of the political aisle, proving that Barron's message of focusing on solutions rather than divisions had struck a chord. His initiative expanded rapidly, launching programs across multiple states to provide addiction recovery resources for at-risk youth. What had started as an unscripted moment at a gala had transformed into a movement. Even Hunter Biden had to acknowledge the shift. In an unexpected turn, he continued working alongside Barron on the initiative, making joint appearances at charity events and speaking on the importance of using influence for meaningful change. Political analysts were stunned. The media, always looking for the next feud, found themselves covering something even more compelling: the unlikely collaboration between two families who had once been at the center of one of the most divisive eras in American politics. Behind the scenes, those closest to Barron saw the transformation as something inevitable. He had learned from the best, but he had also forged his own path. During a quiet dinner at Mar-a-Lago, his father looked at him across the table and nodded. "You always told me that anyone can throw a punch," Barron said, "but it takes real strength to extend a hand." Donald Trump didn't respond right away. He simply took a sip of his drink, then said, "You did good, kid." That moment at the gala wasn't just about a confrontation anymore. It was about what happens when leadership is redefined, not by words, not by legacy, but by action. It was about proving that the next generation didn't have to follow the same rules of engagement as the past. They could rise above the noise, ignore the petty fights, and actually do something that mattered. The moment rippled far beyond that single night. Political commentators continued referencing the Barron Trump approach as a blueprint for handling conflict with grace. Philanthropic organizations began rethinking how they structured their initiatives, prioritizing transparency and direct impact over publicity stunts. Even young people from prominent families, often dismissed as entitled or out of touch, started stepping forward, inspired by Barron's example to use their privilege responsibly. But perhaps the most powerful impact was the one that couldn't be measured in news cycles or donation numbers. Months after the gala, Barron visited one of the treatment centers his initiative had helped fund. A teenage girl approached him, tears in her eyes. "I saw what happened at that gala," she said. "You showed me that we don't have to let other people's expectations define us." Barron spent over an hour talking with her, away from cameras, away from the public eye, embodying the very values he had spoken about on that stage. As the months passed and the initiative continued to grow, it became clear this wasn't just a fleeting moment. It was a movement, a shift in how leadership was perceived. Barron Trump had done more than silence his critics. He had proven that sometimes the strongest response isn't to fight back, but to move forward. And that's what made this moment truly unforgettable.